The Garmin Venu 4 is a smartwatch I would recommend to some of my friends, but I would have to mention limitations because, as always, there is nuance. We will take a deep dive and test many of the important features of the Venu 4, the heart rate tracking accuracy, the sleep stage tracking performance, and the GPS tracking consistency. By the way, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now, before we dive into the testing data, here are the 10 most important things to know about the Garmin Venu 4. First, for sports heart rate, the Venu 4 uses Garmin's latest Elevate optical sensor with 1 second recording. It can broadcast your heart rate to other devices and supports heart rate zones and alerts. It also offers an on-device ECG app, but this is only outside workouts, of course. But if you have access to that, is dependent on your research, but it's separate, of course, from the continuous workout heart rate. Second, for positioning, it has multi-band, multi-GNSS with SetIQ auto-select to switch between regular and dual frequency modes for signal quality if it also needs to optimize battery life at the same time. Activity profiles support GPS-based pace and distance, also breadcrumb tracks and basic course guidance, but this model doesn't have the full onboard maps. Third, sleep tracking includes a nightly sleep score and coaching plus sleep stages. It also has nap detection, overnight HRV, skin temperature, and optional pulse ox while sleeping. The new sleep alignment also compares your schedule, their circadian timing, and sleep consistency summarizes your typical bedtimes. Fourth, Garmin now also added a health status view that flags when your metrics like your resting heart rate variability, respiration, skin temperature, and overnight SpO2 drift outside of your usual range. This feature is in beta, but it's basically the same as what Whoop and Oura have done for quite a while, and also what Apple introduced about a year and a half ago with their Vitals app. And the fact that it's similar to these other things is not bad. I really like that Garmin is also adding a feature like this. Fifth, you can now also log your lifestyle in the app, so you can record factors like caffeine or alcohol intake and later see if there's associations with sleep, stress, and heart rate variability. Now again, these are correlations, not causations or diagnoses. Six, the battery life is actually pretty good. In smartwatch mode, it's rated up to 10 days for the 41mm size I tested and 12 days for the larger model. Now, of course, these battery life values are highly dependent on how you use it, but since I suspect many of you prefer the larger version, it should, for instance, last 16 hours in a workout with all systems GNSS mode plus multiband, but that's if you don't use music over Bluetooth, because that will reduce the battery life quite a bit. Seventh, the watch comes with the new Garmin Fitness Coach and daily suggested workouts that should adapt to your recent training, sleep, and recovery. And there's also a mixed sessions profile now to record multiple activities in one go. 8, we're almost there. Accessibility has been broadened with a spoken watch face that reads out the time and your health data. There's now also a color-friendly display filter and a wheelchair mode with push tracking. 9, the actual hardware now has a metal design with an AMOLED display that supports an always-on mode, a 5 atmospheres water rating, and there's a LED flashlight on the front now, and also a built-in speaker and microphone for calls and voice assistant use when you're paired with your phone, and also certain voice command can run directly on the watch itself. Now, I really like that there's now a flashlight built in. This is more and more common in more watches. Also, Amazfit is doing it now, and it's something I actually use quite a bit. Also, some Suunto devices provide this. So if that's important to you, it's nice that it's now also in this smaller form factor. 10th, this is the final one. The watch retains the usual connected features that you're used to, like Garmin Pay, onboard music storage, morning and evening reports, safety and incident detection, and of course sensor pairing for things like cycling power, and also if you have an external chest strap like your left-right balance, things like this. Keep in mind though that the pulse ox measurement that I mentioned before isn't available everywhere, and it's also not a medical measurement, so check that out on Garmin's website. And the ECG app is also limited to supported regions and only for adults. Now, the Venu 4 comes on this 41mm size and the 45mm larger size, and it's launched at a starting price of $550. Now I'm testing this 41mm version Garmin Venu 4 because this was the one Garmin had available for me to test, but I'm pretty confident based on past experience that the results won't be significantly different from the larger 45mm version. There's two factors that play a role that could make it perform a tiny bit worse or a tiny bit better. It could be a tiny bit worse because there's more light leakage from the outside because of the smaller size. The sensor has less of a buffer on the side here, but on the other hand it's actually a bit lighter, so it might rock a little bit less on the wrist, but I don't think this will be a significant effect though. So let's now get started with the thing you were waiting for, the actual testing of the Garmin Venu 4. And as you're used to, let's start with the performance during indoor cycling, and then let's slowly make things harder and harder for the watch. Regular viewers will know that we use the Polar H10 ECG chest strap as a reference, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately, and that's along the horizontal axis right here. And my heart rate as detected by the Garmin Venu 4 is along the vertical axis. And here again we're looking at indoor cycling, where each dot is a single measurement, and if they would perfectly agree, they should all be along this blue line right here. And as you can see, luckily almost all points are on or close to the blue line, but there's still a few moments where the points are below the blue line, indicating that right then in that moment it was detecting a too low heart rate. And if it's close to the red line, this means it detected about half the actual heart rate. Now that actually happens if the signal quality is quite bad, and then it's hard to see if it's measuring the current heart rate or half that current heart rate, just because there's so much noise in the signal. Overall, pretty decent, but I am curious to see why there are some points below the blue line. The correlation, which is this R value up here, is okay at 0.92. So the best correlation is 1. So 0.92 is not too far away, but I really want to take a look at the individual spinning sessions. I did a total of 5 spinning sessions in this overview. And right here we have the first spinning session I wanted to look at. So I always do interval sessions where you can see when my heart rate increases according to the reference, which is in blue-green, and also when it decreases. And the red line of the Garmin Venu 4 mostly agrees very well. The one thing we can see is that often there's a delay in picking up on an increase in heart rate, sometimes also a delay in the decrease, but especially a delay in picking up on an increase. It's not too bad, and this could be partially algorithmic, where Garmin could intentionally dampen changes in heart rate. Still likely it's slightly too slow in picking up on those changes. However, I don't think this matters much for my actual training schedule or the way I interpret my training, and at the peaks it's always very accurate. This second spinning session looks mostly the same, some small deviation right here. Otherwise very good agreement. Only in the beginning, this is where I detected half the actual heart rate. Here it needed to calibrate, and after that it was fine. Also this session, some small delays in picking up on increases, otherwise not too bad. Same here, and also same for this session. So no major issues, but only for those really quick changes will you not get exactly what most reference devices say. But let's compare this performance to the competition, and you can see that in this overview right here. So we're using the correlation value we're looking at before to rank the devices, where the further to the top right the device is, the better is its agreement with the reference, and the Garmin Venu 4 is somewhere in the middle. I do expect that most devices with a correlation of 0.9 for indoor cycling are good enough, and the Garmin Venu 4 is of course included. However, the Garmin Venu 4 is of course not the best device in this overview. We can actually zoom in quite a bit to look at the better performing devices, and those are right here. And we can see there's basically no Garmin devices with a correlation of 0.95 or higher. There's one that just made the cutoff, but it has the same sensor, the Venu X1. So I think that's partially random chance, partially maybe because the Venu X1 has this Velcro strap, which makes it fit a little bit better. It's also quite thin, so maybe more snug on the wrist. But if you want the best heart rate tracking, you should get, for instance, an Apple Watch, maybe the AirPods Pro 3, which are really good. Also, some Huawei watches are not too bad. And we can also see that the Pixel Watch is quite a good heart rate tracker. We can actually zoom in even a little bit more. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.98 or higher. And indeed, we have the Pixel Watch 4, the Pixel Watch 3, and also different Apple Watches. Now be aware, there's always some uncertainty in these measurements. So I don't think we can say, for instance, that the Apple Watch Ultra 2 right here did worse than the Apple Watch Ultra 3 right here. This is still within the realm of testing inaccuracies. So be aware, these values are not perfect, but they give us a good impression of which devices are really good, and all of these up here I can recommend. So that looks okay, though not perfect, but definitely good enough. There appear to be some delays in picking up on changes in heart rate, especially increases. Nothing major, but just slightly. Though as we saw in my recent ECG chest strap review, it could at least partially be that this is because Garmin processes the heart rate signal differently and intentionally doesn't allow for these super fast changes in heart rate. If that's the case, I sort of get it, but I would prefer Polar's processing or Wow's processing. But as I said, there is a chance that Garmin to a degree did this intentionally, but it's hard to say for sure. Regardless, the results are good enough. My training wouldn't be affected whether I had this signal or the reference signal. But let's next take a look at a much harder exercise for a device to track: running outside. But before doing that, running this channel next to my full-time job as a scientist is neither easy nor cheap, since it costs a lot of time and money. I pay my editor Alex, for instance, and I've also bought most devices I've ever tested myself. If you want to support, the easiest way of doing that is by using my Amazon affiliate link before any purchase that you make. This is a general link, and if you bookmark it once after clicking it and then use that to make any future purchase on Amazon, you support the channel and it doesn't cost you any extra. Another more direct way of supporting is by becoming a YouTube member, which gives you early access to some of my videos like this one, which is linked up here. Also check out some of my other discount affiliate links in the description below, many of which give you the best discount possible. But let's get back to the results for running. And here we have that overview for running, which honestly looks pretty good, though not amazing again. So most points are close to the blue line, but there's some points above it, but we do see sort of these ribbons of points that go along the line that are below it. And this indicates to me that for a while right here, for instance, the Venu 4 was detecting a too low heart rate by about 20 to 30 BPM. Or for instance, this track right here, it was detecting a too high heart rate by maybe 20 BPM. So there might be some short moments of cadence lock going on. Now a correlation again of 0.91 isn't bad, also not great. So here I really want to look at the individual runs, because there might be some good and bad runs in the batch. I did a total of 4 runs, so let's have a look. Now here we have the first run that I did, which mostly looks perfect. Only the first, let's say 7 minutes or so, did the Venu 4 detect a too high heart rate. This might have been some form of cadence lock or some kind of weird interference with the signal, and then quickly locked onto my heart rate again. So as my body was warming up, probably also the signal quality got better, it did get the correct heart rate. So only in the beginning it struggled for this run. This run was good in the beginning, and then in my intervals it struggled. So here I detected a too low heart rate. You can see all of a sudden here it locks on again when I go a bit slower. Then this run, also with intervals, actually looks a lot better than this run. So this second interval run here was almost perfect, whereas for this first one it really struggled. So you can also see some day-to-day variation. And this last run is again almost perfect. Here I started it a bit too late, so I started it about 10 minutes into my run or so. After that, it's close to perfect, even fully detecting this dip right here when I had to stop to tie my shoelaces, I think. So overall pretty good, but some minor artifacts, especially during the first 2 runs. So this first one had a delay in picking up on the correct heart rate here in the beginning, and here I just struggled during the intervals. Not perfect, showing some medium to minor issues. What do you think? But let's compare this result to the competition, and that's displayed in this overview right here. Again, the further to the top right, the better the correlation with the reference device. And the Venu 4 is again in the middle, close to, for instance, some other Garmin devices. We can actually zoom in a little bit. So right here we have just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And the Venu 4 is close to, for instance, the Enduro 3. Also not too far from, for instance, the Phoenix 8, which is quite a bit heavier, similar to the Enduro 3. Also the Instinct 3 is right here. And again, the Venu X1, also with the same sensor, isn't too far off. This can still be due to day-to-day variation in the way I train. interval sessions are likely a bit harder sometimes for some devices, which is maybe why the Forerunner 570, the Forerunner 165, and also the Forerunner 970 did better. Maybe I did fewer intervals. I'm not too sure why these were so much better than it seems the Venu 4 did. I also tested these more in the summer to spring period where temperatures are higher. Potentially the blood flow in my arm is less restricted. So that also goes to show that potentially testing environment matters. I try to standardize as much as possible, but I cannot control nature, and I also have sometimes different running plans. Again, the Runner app is amazing for that. But overall, we can see that some other devices like some Apple devices and Pixel watches are much more consistent. So if we zoom into just the better performing devices, these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.95 or higher. We again did see some Garmin devices, especially Forerunners, that did quite well on me. But then we also have, for instance, the Pixel Watch 3 and the Pixel Watch 4 right here, and also many different Apple Watches and some Huawei devices. I'm just sharing the test results with you as I have them, and you can decide based on your preferences what you need. So the results for running were mixed, I would say. I would say that 2 runs were really good and 2 showed some issues at least. So I'm not sure what to make of it. What do you think? Let us know in the description below. By the way, if you want the best running plans, I recommend the Runner app, which helped me run a lot better and faster. You can find an affiliate link for that up here, which gives you a 2-week free trial so you can test it out. But let's now make things even more difficult by looking at the results for cycling outside. And here we have that overview for cycling, which definitely doesn't look as good as what we saw for running and biking indoors. Yes, quite a few points are still close to the blue line, but the deviations are really big now, many of which are getting close to the red line right here. The Garmin Venu 4 is never detecting less than half the actual heart rate, but this is really not looking that great. Let's take a look at some of the individual cycling sessions to see why we get such a low correlation of 0.68. Now, I did a total of 12 mostly commuting bike rides with the Venu 4 and the reference. And as you can see, again, we see delays in picking up on increases in heart rate and sometimes also decreases in heart rate. So this first bike ride really doesn't look that good. This second one potentially is a tiny bit better, so sort of 3 out of 5 peaks were detected. However, this third and fourth peak weren't detected, and again here we have a delay in picking up on a decrease in heart rate. Same for this session. This actually looks quite okay, still some delays, but this would be good enough for me. Also, this session doesn't look too bad. This one is a bit worse again, with at the end it really struggling. Also here, big struggles. This is also not too great. Same here, same here. So overall, just these delays in picking up on changes in my heart rate, which I'm really not too happy with. And you can also see that when we compare it to the competition. So the Garmin Venu 4 really ends up quite low in this overview, where most Garmin devices are not amongst the absolute worst devices down here, but still in the middle to lower tier devices in this range right here, and not amongst the absolute best ones. So again, we see, for instance, the Enduro 3, Vivo Active 6, Venu 3, Forerunner 255, also the Forerunner 965, Phoenix 8, all of these are not too far away from the performance of the Venu 4. Some of these have the same sensor, some of these have an older generation sensor. Garmin just doesn't seem to do too well on me. Only right here, I can actually zoom in a bit. We actually see that the Venu X1 and Instinct 3 did do a bit better on me. These also have the same sensor. So we can also see some testing variation. Also potentially sort of the shielding of the external light is better on these 2 devices because they're a bit bigger. So more distance from the sensor to the outside. Overall though, at least on me, Garmin devices aren't great heart rate trackers for cycling outside. For that, I would connect a chest strap to your Garmin device. The only ones I can really recommend are devices with a correlation above 0.9, preferably 0.95 or higher. So those are these devices right here. Let's just take a look at those. So we have different Huawei devices, cheaper ones like the Huawei Watch Fit 2, Huawei Watch Fit 4. Also, different Pixel watches are doing really well on Android, or Apple watches, for instance, on iOS. So overall, not a great result for the Venu 4 for outdoor cycling on me. Now here I would say that the results for cycling outside leave something to be desired. They're not totally horrible, but I see enough issues that I wouldn't use the built-in PPG monitor of the Venu 4 to track my heart rate. Based on this, I would just get an ECG chest strap, JUX, which is generally the most reliable way of tracking your heart rate. And luckily, the Venu 4 has no issues connecting to an external heart rate monitor. So I really recommend checking that out if you're interested in the Venu 4 and you want to do things like cycling or actually weightlifting. So to close off, let's take a look at weightlifting. And here we have that overview for weightlifting, where we see the expected pattern for many smartwatches, where in the lower heart rate range, things aren't too bad. But then when I start doing a set and my heart rate increases, it just cannot detect that increase in heart rate correctly. So there's quite a few points here below the blue line. The correlation is also quite low at 0.67. But let's take a look at some of those individual weightlifting sessions so you can actually see what's going on here. Now here we have the first weightlifting session I did. So each time I did a set, you can see my heart rate increased as in blue-green by the reference device. And the Garmin Venu 4 in red just doesn't detect those spikes in heart rate. Now these are mostly upper body workouts, but you can see the same for this second session, third session, fourth session, and fifth session. So for gym workouts, I just cannot recommend it, but that's basically true for almost any device out there, which you can also see in this overview right here. So the further to the top right the device is, the better its correlation with the reference device. And only Apple watches and some ear-based devices like, for instance, the AirPods Pro 3 are good enough. So you can see that in this overview. But even the AirPods Pro 3 have their downsides. With weightlifting, the difficulty is just if there's so much tension on your arm, there's just such a bad signal quality that also the Apple Watch stops detecting your heart rate in those moments. So these are the results and my recommendations. Now this was expected and just another reason to JUX. Most devices aren't very reliable at tracking your heart rate during weightlifting, and this appears to be especially true for the Garmin Venu 4. For indoor cycling it was good enough, for running it was potentially good enough, but at least on me, on my body, the built-in heart rate monitor of the Venu 4 just isn't good enough for cycling outside or weightlifting. For cycling outside, it might potentially do a little bit better for road biking than for commuting. So most of my testing was during commuting. And when I'm commuting on my city bike, my arms are like this, which generally means there's a bit more torque and a bit more tension on my arm. Whereas during road biking, when I'm in a more dropped position or on top, actually there's a little bit less strain on my arm. Still, it wasn't good enough in my testing, I would say. But what about recovery and tracking your sleep stages? Can the Venu 4 track this? Let's take a look. And here we have an overview of the sleep stage tracking results, with the sleep stages as measured by the reference EEG device on top and the sleep stages as measured by the Venu 4 on the left right here. Now each column here is normalized to 100%. Meaning that if the reference device would agree perfectly with the Venu 4, all values along the diagonal in yellow right here should be 100%. Now, first of all, deep sleep agreement isn't bad at all at 75% agreement. So 75% of what the reference device said was deep sleep was also detected as deep sleep by the Venu 4, and all of it was confused with light sleep. Light sleep agreement is also pretty good at about 72%, and most confusion was with deep sleep and with REM sleep, both at around 11% or so. So these first two stages are actually pretty good. A little bit of extra deep sleep and REM sleep are potentially detected, but otherwise this isn't looking too bad. But the REM sleep detection is just the worst by far out of the three sleep stages at about 48% agreement. So 48% of what the reference device said was REM sleep was also detected as REM sleep by the Venu 4, but about the same amount was detected as light sleep instead. So these first two stages I would sort of trust, but this last one, REM sleep, I don't have much trust in. But let's actually quickly take a look at two example nights. So this overview is based on a total of 6 nights, and I just want to show you 2 or 3 of those. And here we have the first example night with the EEG device on top and the Venu 4 on the bottom. And here I actually struggled a bit with sleep, so I had trouble falling asleep. So I fell asleep for a bit, then woke up again. And then finally I fell asleep. I also had relatively little deep sleep this night. But what deep sleep I had was also detected by the Venu 4, it just detected a bit of extra deep sleep. So the deep sleep here as measured by the Zmax reference on top is marked in purple, which is also marked on the bottom for the Venu 4. And REM sleep agreement also isn't great, though actually not terrible for this night. And you can see that in this overview right here. The reference actually detected no REM sleep in my first sleep cycle. This is sort of a typical phenotype for me, where I have little to no REM sleep in my first sleep cycle. Then in my second, third, and fourth sleep cycle, the Venu 4 detected the last two more or less correctly, just not this first longer REM sleep segment that I had. And if we take a look at the second night right here, we again see pretty good deep sleep agreement. Basically all deep sleep detected by the EEG device was also detected by the Venu 4. Again, I have a very short REM sleep segment here in the beginning, which was a bit longer according to the Venu 4. You can actually take a look at that right here. So this sort of matches, but a bit too much is detected. Later on though, the REM sleep agreement is pretty poor or medium, I would say. Some extra REM sleep is detected in moments where I likely didn't have REM sleep. And also some of the REM sleep here near the end is missed. So definitely not terrible what the Venu 4 detects, but also not great. But we can actually compare this performance to that of much of the competition out there. And here we have that overview of many of the devices I've tested in the past. Again, the further to the top right the device is, the better is its agreement with the reference. And all devices marked in green were tested against the Zmax EEG headband, so the same one we used in this video. And the Garmin Venu 4 is marked in green right here. So it's close to quite a few other Garmin devices like the Venu 3, the Phoenix 8, the Forerunner 165. But we also have, for instance, the Enduro 3 not too far, the Vivo Active 5, the Forerunner 970. All of them are sort of in this middle area right here. Not bad like the devices on the bottom left right here, but also not good or great like the devices on the top right. Now at the moment there are 6 top brands for sleep stage tracking, at least in my testing, mostly also confirmed by scientific literature. Those are Fitbit and Google, which just improved their sleep stage tracking. There's also Sleep2 or Nukua, which is an app from Austria, which does quite well, but it is a subscription service similar to, for instance, the Whoop strap, which does quite well as well. The same goes also for the Oura Ring. And then there's the Apple Watch, which is an overall great sleep tracker as well. Now, any variation between models for instance, the Apple Watch, I think is mostly due to differences in my sleep quality and testing variation. You should sort of look at the average out of all of those, but they're all doing quite well. And finally, there's the 8 Sleep Pod, which is not a wearable, so something you wear on your wrist, but this is something that goes around your mattress and it can actively heat and cool each side of the bed independently. It's my favorite overall sleep improvement device because I'm quite a hot sleeper, for instance, so it needs to be cooled down for me. But then basically any partner I've had in the past, they always needed the bed to be a bit warmer than mine. So I would normally open the window in winter. The girlfriends I've had generally didn't like this. So the 8 Sleep has been a godsend for this, especially also in summer when it's so hot and I have trouble sleeping. It really helps me cool down. But in addition to that, it can also actively track things like your heart rate variability, breathing rate, things like that, without wearing anything on your body, just the sensors built into sort of the mattress cover. Now, if you want to check it out, it is really expensive, but if you want to get the best discount possible, you can use my affiliate link up here or down here, and you'll be supporting the channel at the same time. But as I said, these are the top brands up here. In the middle right here is where Apple resides. And that's mostly because of that poor REM sleep tracking. So you have to decide for yourself if that's even important for you. Now, the sleep stage tracking performance is about as good as we know from Garmin based on my testing. It's somewhere in the middle of all devices in terms of performance. It's not terrible by any means, but also not great. Especially the REM sleep tracking is still very lacking for most Garmin devices. But at least on my body, the deep sleep tracking is actually pretty okay. So it really depends if and how you want to use the sleep stages. And many of you maybe don't care about your sleep stages at all. So in that case, it doesn't really matter. I'm just showing you the data. However, for sports, your pace and speed are also important. And at the heart of that, I would say, is the GPS tracking performance. So let's see how the Venu 4 performed. Just as background, I set the Garmin Venu 4 in its most accurate mode for all the testing. And let's start by looking at the GPS tracking results for cycling outside. Now, the way we will be testing it is by looking at the consistency between signals when I cycle the same route several times. And if the device has good GPS tracking, it's much more likely that also the tracks will be very consistent and nicely overlapping. Now, first we want to see, is the signal quickly acquired? And yes, it is. I cannot show you where it was acquired because that's where I live, but let's just say the signal's basically acquired instantly. So looking really good. And also the corners are not too rounded, which I like, so there's not a lot of smoothing going on. And then right here we can see that the signals are relatively consistent, a little bit of deviation here still. But here it's starting to look really good as the GPS tracking quality gets better, looking really good right here. Little bit of deviation, but not too much. Here one signal is deviating a bit. Here, of course, I actually did take 2 different routes, again with not too much rounding, so not too much smoothing. And here the signals get to be really consistent, looking really good all the way up here. Also here, this is actual deviation, so sometimes I go a bit more along this side and sometimes a bit more along this side, so looking really good, quite consistent, a little bit more deviation I'd like to see right here. But overall actually looking quite good. So those were actually 4 times I cycled to work, but let's now take a look at 4 times I cycled back from work. In the beginning there is actually a bit of deviation, but then here it starts to look super consistent, so really good. Bit of deviation right here, also right here. Not absolutely perfect, but no devices. Oh, this I actually hadn't noticed before. Here there's one signal that's deviating quite a bit, otherwise looking quite good along here. Just this signal now struggles a little bit. Then here looking quite good again. Also here looking quite consistent. Here a little bit of deviation. Here sometimes watches struggle because I think there's some interference going on here. Then here again looking super consistent. Also here. Then here along the radio tower, often devices struggle. Let's see if that's the case. Well, a little bit of deviation here near the radio station, but actually not bad. And here looking super consistent again. So generally looking very solid. And let's now take a look at the results for running. So for running, again, I'm also very boring and I just run in the same circle many times. And this is a GPS as tracked by the Venu 4. So one thing you should know, on the left right here, there's basically not much interference to the signal. Whereas on the right here, there is a big wall from a building. So often around here, many devices struggle. And you can see there's a little bit more deviation on this side than on this side. But the Venu 4 is honestly doing really well. You can see the signals are really consistent. Also right here, a little bit of deviation potentially, but otherwise just looking very good. Maybe a little bit of smoothing here. I thought it wouldn't do it, but maybe there is actually a tiny bit of smoothing going on. I'm not too sure. Overall looking very good. Also right here around the corner, you can see more or less how I actually ran. Many devices smooth this a lot more, so this is looking really good. As far as I know, Garmin really doesn't like smoothing, so this might have actually been the raw signal. But I also did a second run, which you can see right here. And this actually looks even better and even less smooth. Interestingly, there's a little bit more jitteriness to the signal, but even more consistent potentially. This was also a shorter run, so there's fewer overlapping tracks, which generally makes it look a little bit better. But overall, I'm quite happy with this. I'm not exactly sure why this signal right here actually looks a bit more jittery or so than this signal right here. I don't think I changed any running settings, so I'm not entirely sure what was going on. This was actually the first run I ever did with this device, whereas this right here is a run I did later on, so there could have been an update. This was about 4 or 5 days later, so I don't expect much has changed. And I always update the device before use. However, overall, both are really good and really consistent. So overall, very happy with this result. I do think this was actually a faster run, so that also could have had some effect, where slower runs might look a bit more smooth. Overall, very solid performance. The running actually looks even better than the cycling in my opinion, but I don't know what you think. That's some very solid GPS tracking performance for the Venu 4 for both cycling and running. This is the level of performance I would judge as being amongst the best out there. You're not gonna get more solid performance than you get with Garmin devices, especially with the dual frequency GPS. Only a few brands and models like the Apple Watch Ultra 3, different Soon2 devices and Coros devices have similar or close to similar performance to something like the Venu 4, but I'm really happy happy with Garmin. They're really sort of the market leader in GPS tracking, and I would trust the pace and speed provided by the Venu 4, though of course there will always be some issues with any device that you have. So what's my overall conclusion of the Venu 4 and who should get it and would I get it? Well, I really like this device, but not on its own. In my opinion, it's best when combined with an external heart rate monitor. And at least on my body, that's definitely needed. Paired with that, especially in ECG chest strap, it's an amazing device for sports. Unfortunately, you don't get all the mapping functionalities you get with more expensive Garmin watches. I suspect that the watch could handle it, but Garmin just blocks it off from the watch because they want to distinguish a different tier of devices. I of course get this. They need to give you a reason to buy the more expensive devices, and they get to decide this. But if you're into hiking or trail running, you might want to look at more expensive Garmin devices or other options out there. But otherwise, I really like the Venu 4. It looks in many ways a lot cleaner than most Garmin devices, and that's the kind of design I like. I actually like the look of it a lot better than, for instance, the Foreigner series, which are very sporty, but for day-to-day that looks not really for me. I would have preferred the larger version though, because even though I don't have huge wrists, this still looks a bit small on mine. And I do also appreciate that Garmin is more and more focusing on health and introducing different features for that. The only thing that remains to be improved is the sleep tracking, and if they manage that, I would have a pretty complete setup if I had a Garmin Venu 4 plus external ECG heart rate monitor. Now of course Garmin isn't gonna advertise their sleep stage tracking isn't the best out there, but I wouldn't be surprised that when they improve it, they really market it and show it to you. So just be aware that in my testing and also in scientific literature, this is something where Garmin still needs to improve. Now the reason I think I would have a pretty solid setup with the Garmin Venu 4 and an external heart rate monitor is because I also use many other Garmin products and sensors which seamlessly integrate with it. I have a Tax indoor trainer, I have power meters on my road bikes, I also have different external heart rate monitors, I sometimes use the running pod. There's all these things that almost seamlessly integrate into the Garmin app, and I also for instance use a Garmin cycling computer which also connects to all my accessories, and when I'm biking outside I don't even need to wear a watch because of course I'm wearing an external heart rate monitor. So it's just a nice complete system if you're very sporty and you're doing different things. So overall, the Venu 4 is a solid sports tracker, and if you use a bunch of external sensors, it might just be the recommended device for you. But if you want one device that does it all, I don't think the Venu 4 is complete enough. You really need an external heart rate monitor, and you don't need to care too much about your sleep stages. In terms of a more complete device, there's for instance the Whoop strap right here, though there the heart rate tracking could also still be a bit improved, and there you cannot connect an external heart rate monitor, which is also not ideal. If you're purely focused on health and sleep, then I actually really like the Oura ring, which now also comes in different colors. I'm actually really happy with this sort of ceramic Oura ring I have now, but I also still have the normal one. Now, if you do decide to get the Garmin Venu 4, maybe a Whoop strap, an Apple Watch, an H-Sleep pod, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper or coffee beans, you want to get the best discount possible and also support the channel, you can use one of my affiliate links down here or up here and support your wallet and the channel at the same time. Now, I think you will like this video on the Garmin Forerunner 970, my favorite running watch, or this video on Apple's new sleep score.